Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. You'll notice that you are all on mute. We do welcome any questions in the question box, and when we get to the end of today's webinar, we'll make sure to tackle them for you as well. My name is Chris.
And my name is also Chris, which I guess makes things a bit easier.
Well, today we're going to be walking through what a DevOps approach brings to the database and what compliance actually means in relation to this process. And of course, process is absolutely going to be key here. It's going to be the sword that actually slays that dragon.
Yeah, this is quite key for a lot of people right now. I think we probably have all got a load of emails recently telling us about updates to privacy policies, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's really a hot button issue with the introduction of GDPR recently.
Absolutely, and not even just GDPR, but also lots of other different legislations around the world. And the thing we're going to really tackle today is the difference between the two and how DevOps does not have to be a separate thing from compliance.
So for those of you wondering which Chris is which, I am the dashing, handsome, and clean-cut gentleman. So that's the one on the left.
And I'm the Chris on the right with the perfect face for radio. But for argument's sake, I can also be Chris 1.
You know, I think you're being a bit unfair to yourself. I think you could also very easily do podcasts.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. So a little bit about Redgate before we get started. We're an 18-year-old company. Happy birthday us, with lots of different companies and customers all around the world using our software solutions. That's including about 91% of the Fortune 100. And we get obviously a lot of different visits from people all over the year. You'll see that we're about a 230 person company. Well, actually
231 now.
Absolutely, that's because Chris K to my left here is actually also a new joiner here at Redgate.
And loving it so far. So, Chris, data breaches. That's what we're going to talk about.
Yes.
And the key thing is whether they are a good thing or a bad thing.
Well, gee whiz, Chris, I have to be honest, I think we can all agree that data breaches are pretty bad. A company's data is one of its most valuable and important resources. Managing and protecting that data are both big responsibilities, and now more than ever, a data governance process must be put into place to avoid the misuse of that data and to meet legislative requirements.
Okay, that's news to me. That's good to know. I think this Jim guy would also probably agree with you there. So he's put this nice quote out, but who is he?
Well, Jim's obviously a senior research scientist with Cylance, and he focuses on stuff like next level attacks, actors, campaigns, as well as underground markets and associated criminal activity. To me, this quote really brings home the actual detrimental impact of a data breach or leak.
So not only is a data breach a bad thing, but it might also have a long-term impact as well.
Well, no one's going to just sell my data on without my express consent, right?
No, probably not. I think the people who tend to steal data tend to be quite moral individuals as a whole. You know, the whole black market thing gets a bit of a bad rap these days, I think.
Absolutely.
Okay, so data breaches, they're bad and they have long-term consequences. And I guess they're pretty big headlines whenever they happen. And to be honest, it affects all of us. So we're all going to have some bit of data somewhere that is all liable to be at risk from a data breach.
Yes, absolutely, including the both of us. Most recently, in 2018, roughly 150 million users of the MyFitnessPal app actually had their personal details leaked in a data breach, including usernames, email addresses, passwords. Under Armour, who own MyFitnessPal, said that it became aware of the breach on the 25th of March. And though it actually occurred in late February 2018, so almost a month to declare, and smack bang in the middle of those records was indeed my own data.
Although, if we're honest, there's probably not a whole lot of data there, is there?
Well,
You worked out that one time in 2015?
well, I don't want hackers finding that out.
Okay, so if hackers are able to match those stolen login credentials to the user's actual fitness data, then that's a pretty bad thing, I guess. So having that level of data would allow hackers to know that Mr. Unwin has a very specific and predictable pattern of behavior. Or in other words, he doesn't really work out all that much.
True.
But seriously, fitness trackers don't only track calories and the number of steps a person walks in a day, it also knows where people are and at what time. Honestly, the breaches mentioned here happened in the last few years, but undoubtedly, larger and more serious breaches probably lie ahead. Okay, so what actually causes these data breaches? Is it just like the classic hit 1995 film starring Angelina Jolie, Hackers?
Well, it's a grey area. You're not wrong, Chris. Hackers do make up a really good proportion of the breaches at about 55%. But also when you add things up like employee error, accidental internet exposure, malicious internal activities, it can still look pretty bleak.
Okay, so this is the breakdown, and I guess the percentages are pretty interesting. But really, that doesn't tell me how often this is actually happening.
Well, in 2017, the Identity Theft Resource Center, or ITRC, reported a total of 1,579 data breaches, which is a new annual record and about 45% higher than the previous record, which was only about 1,091 set in 2016.
Okay, so again, there's a lot of breaches, but how much data does that actually equate to?
Well, up to February 21st this year, the count from the ITRC actually revealed there had been 140 data breaches recorded up to that point, and that nearly 3 million records had been exposed since the beginning of the year.
Okay, so not insubstantial then.
Absolutely. So the ITRC's breach database is actually updated daily for those of you who want to subscribe, and is published to their website weekly. And in a recent update dated May 14th, 2018, it shows a snapshot of US data breaches across 5 key sectors. You can see how since February, in only 3 months, the number has crept up considerably.
Yeah, so I actually have a case study from one of these. So there's a particular organization in the healthcare sector in the US called US Acute Care Solutions, and they're based in Ohio. And they published a data breach which exposed around 16,000 records.
Well, 16,000, that's quite a lot. But then another significant breach was also at Nuance, the San Francisco Department of Health and others, who said that 45,000 records was the number exposed.
All right, show off. So there's a lot of records, and the important thing there is that they're medical records as well. Right?
Absolutely. Personally identifiable and also protected health information in there as well.
So the good news is that we've got the GDPR in Europe to help safeguard us against this. What about the rest of the world?
Well, recently, much has been made of the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, which actually became enforceable on the 25th of May.
Though, if I recall correctly, that's been technically in law since around 2016, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay, so data protection laws around the world, I think for some time have been evolving and maturing to really protect the rights of the individual. It's not just the GDPR. So I guess what we're seeing here is a snapshot of various different countries' interpretations of personal data and exactly what is meant by sensitive. So, Chris, Mr. Almanic, do you have any good examples of this?
Well, it's almost like we've prepared some sort of webinar on this topic, Chris. But yes, as it happens, I have a couple. So we've already mentioned the US. They've got about 20 national privacy or data security laws. In Canada, one of the primary statutes is the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, or PIPEDA. Try saying that 3 times fast. We've got the data privacy and protection legislation in Australia, which is made up of a mix of federal and state or territory legislation. And then also in South Korea, a law relating to protection of personal information, or the Personal Information Protection Act, or PIPA, was enacted and became effective as of the 30th of September 2011. So very much welcome to the new world of data privacy and protection.
Okay, that's a nice diagram to support that.
Absolutely. This particular graphic is from DLA Piper's Data Protection Laws of the World Handbook. For those of you who don't know, DLA Piper are a global law firm, and they launched the first edition of this in 2012. And the handbook sets out an overview of the key privacy and data protection laws and regulations across nearly 100 different jurisdictions. So what we're seeing is an unprecedented growth in data protection laws pretty much everywhere. So local and global businesses are just going to have to rethink how they collect and control their data.
But what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of countries on there who don't have a heavy or even robust piece of legislation around this. So, there's some that are red and orange, but not all of them. Does this mean that those countries don't really have to worry about protecting sensitive data?
No, not at all. Legislation such as the GDPR, POPI, PIPA, etc. is just the standard. This is our first soiree to the party, and it's only going to have greater emphasis put on it as more and more countries adopt stronger legislation. But even beyond this, good compliance should really just be good practice. And even in countries where there aren't any strong controls, businesses are taking note that it's all about the process and realizing that it's up to them to take the first step rather than dealing with it at a later date or waiting for legislation to tell them what to do. It's almost like they're implementing appropriate technical measures by design and by default.
Okay, yeah, I see what you did there. That's seamless.
Thanks.
So, in summary, all these laws together are enforcing what is essentially good practice. So instead of treating compliance like an afterthought or a barrier, it simply becomes part of the design process and can be merged in from the beginning.
Well, privacy by design has always been an implicit requirement of data protection that the UK's Information Commissioner's Office, or ICO, has consistently championed, and it now features as a key requirement under many legislations, including the GDPR.
Okay, but what does that actually mean from a technical standpoint? What steps am I going to have to take?
Well, we've outlined a number of technical measures that seem to align across most of the data privacy legislations, certainly ones that seem to get called out an awful lot by everyone from industry champions to DBAs, developers to lawyers, architects. And the thing to bear in mind here is that obviously all of these different pieces of legislation, there is a certain amount of grey interpretation. It doesn't tell us exactly what to do with our data. It doesn't tell us exactly how to protect it, but it suggests roughly what you should be doing.
Yeah, so for example, documentation, like wherever sensitive data is found across your estate, that should be well documented, and not just where that is, but the processes around that.
Absolutely. Then there's encryption, pseudonymization, anonymization. Wherever we're taking data out of our production environment, are we making sure that data is only being processed in line with what we need it for, or are we processing other data that we possibly shouldn't be and therefore should be protecting it somehow?
We also have to consider the monitoring aspect of that. So a data loss can be defined as simply having loss of access to data. So the oversight of that data is crucial as well.
Exactly. The next one is quite a close one to our hearts here at Redgate as well, and that's change control. Now, when you have a flexible, repeatable, reliable process for controlling all of your data, making sure that it's protected, that's perfectly fine. But if a developer comes along and does their job, adds a column to a table which starts collecting new sensitive information, but we don't have a process to also adopt that into the same flexible, repeatable, reliable process, then it could get missed. So we need something that is able to help with change control alongside compliance.
And we also have to consider the fact that not every change that's made will happen within that change control process. So having something that is there to act as a catch-all for any change that happens outside of that is also crucial.
Absolutely. So there is plenty for us all to do, and it doesn't just stop here. The only way we can ever completely remove any and all risk associated with data is if we were to just drop all of our databases, just like the pub chain Wetherspoons did here in the UK.
I mean, to be honest, that kind of seems like a bit much.
Yeah, possibly.
So realistically, maybe it's better just to do everything we can by design and default, eh?
I see what you did there.
Okay, so the question is, how do we implement appropriate technical controls as part of our processes?
Well, to me, it just sounds like DevOps.
So this is an interesting quote. We see DevOps defined all the time, and there's a whole host of different definitions for that. To some people, it's simply a department or a team or some individuals within a company. To others, it's tooling, and to others, it's actually the process itself of taking changes from development all the way to production. But yeah, we like this quote a lot. I think what Donovan is getting at here is that DevOps is really more than just those specific things, but it's more of a mindset that must first be adopted.
Absolutely, it's all of those things as one. Once everyone is on board, once everyone's got the mindset, once everyone's ready to put in place a flexible, repeatable, reliable, and overall secure process from start to end, it becomes that one unified approach. All right, well, let's take a quick look at Skyscanner.
Okay, cool. Whereabouts are we going?
No, I don't mean like that. I mean how Skyscanner adopted a DevOps approach. So for those of you who don't know, Skyscanner are a Scotland-founded company which made a rather impressive journey from about 3 founders with a spreadsheet to a team of about 800 people managing the world's largest travel search engine. What's particularly interesting is how Skyscanner's engineers have managed to change their organization, services, and release process over time by introducing practices such as continuous delivery. Skyscanner's engineers, or the code voyagers, are actually able to release software 95 times a day.
Okay, so that sounds like quite a lot of releases. But why? Why are they doing that? What's the benefit of that?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Chris. Waiting until the point of release to see how our software behaves is a key cause of chaotic or even catastrophic software releases. The need to bake quality and compliance in by ensuring the realistic configurations and data sets are, as Microsoft would say, shifted left, has never been higher. And the DevOps movement recognizes that.
Yeah, I guess the points on this slide really highlight the areas in which DevOps can be, well, transformative, right? In general, if we are more focused and have a shorter feedback loop, then those compliance questions can be better fielded. And for example, if we are user-focused and have compliance in mind, then we are ensuring it is being applied at each stage, and we can provide assurance back to those end users. Furthermore, if we have a shorter feedback loop, then any accidental breaches can be quickly assessed and covered.
You mean assessed, covered, and reported within 72 hours, maybe?
72 hours? Yeah, that's true. Under GDPR, it's 72 hours. Okay, so that's enough words. Let's have a look at the picture.
Much better.
So this should be quite a familiar diagram to anyone who has looked to streamline their development pipeline. But for those of you who haven't seen this before, what we have here is our development team on the left, and they are committing changes to our application or database code and pushing that into our source control repository. Once it's there, that can act as a trigger to initiate a build automatically and that's the continuous integration step you see there. And then once that build is in place, we push that down to release management, and then we can automatically push that through our pipeline to those pre-production environments. So, that could be testing, UAT, QA, assurance, integration, all of those good things.
Absolutely. But the key thing here is that this is more the ideal. And in practice, we don't come across too many people who have a very straightforward release process like this. Indeed, manual processes tend to impact every single stage of software delivery, whether you have continuous integration and deployment in place or not. Having a reliable and repeatable process in place gives you a good foundation from which to build your own defensible position. Whether it's tracking changes to the underlying tables in which the data is stored, or monitoring the databases and servers where those tables are stored, DevOps and compliance go hand in hand to ensure that you're able to deliver value to end users and customers without compromising on good data protection practices or vice versa.
Okay, so what we've talked about a lot is how DevOps and compliance can go hand in hand, but I'm not quite seeing how that fits here in this particular diagram.
Well, Chris, I'm glad you asked about that. Here's one I actually prepared earlier. In fact, with a little more thought and some help from the right tooling, it's a relatively simple process to extend our previous diagram to include the relevant tasks and complete the cycle. Here, once we have a version deployed to production, we begin monitoring that environment to detect any loss of access, any odd behavior, for example.
Yeah, so then we can introduce a backwards chain that allows us to take that environment as a source and provision pre-production environments as copies that have had any sensitive data removed as part of the process. Okay, so let's take a little bit more of a look at these stages a little bit more closely and highlight what practical steps we can be taking around this area.
Well, Redgate as a company believes that by following 4 key steps in your processes, you will ensure that you are treating compliance in DevOps as serious business.
So it's all about those key questions, the where, the what, the who, and the how.
So it was Colonel Mustard in the billiards room with the candlestick.
Well, not quite, but you're warm. It's about the questions surrounding your data. So it's all about not only taking that data and putting in adequate checks around it, but also proving that you're performing that process. We see this all the time in compliance. It's not just about complying with the legislation, but you've also got to prove that you're complying with it.
Exactly. When you're in an exam writing down the correct answers, it's not just what people want to see, and definitely will not get you all the marks. It's really about showing you're working, the processes you followed to get to the right answer, so that they can see you haven't just gotten there by accident.
Yeah, I can agree more. It also generally makes the examiner's life easier. If you're showing you're working clearly, then the examiner is going to be happier with what you're doing. So a happier examiner or a happy auditor is really what we all want.
So fortunately, there are several ways to get to this point of showing the where, the what, the who, and how. And of course, with being a Redgate webinar, we do have a suite of tooling that we think can help you along the way.
I didn't see that one coming.
Surprise. So Redgate's approach to compliant DevOps practices will ensure you future-proof your methods. It's not about trying to stick a band-aid on the issue and hoping it holds, but rather, as we said at the beginning, to just bake compliance in from the start. And indeed, the SQL Data Privacy Suite gives us plenty of oomph with which to tackle this.
So we would likely initiate this cycle with a discovery and classification process, literally in, to use the analogy, a diagnosis, to identify sensitive data across the estate and where specifically it's located. So with SQL Estate Manager, we can save time mapping our SQL Server estate from production servers to copies for development and test, as well as seeing who has access to them. Once we've done that, we can give data context by assigning descriptive labels. This is then aligned to the Microsoft taxonomy, so personal, non-personal, special. And then we can export simple reports to ensure alignment with colleagues and to help service subject access requests.
Exactly. And once we know the size of the headache, it's easier to prescribe the right medicine to protect that data. Through a combination of tools, we can safeguard against data breaches and unauthorized access by pseudonymizing, literally masking sensitive data. We can employ repeatable, transparent, and most of all, auditable processes for provisioning databases in a much more efficient manner. We can ensure that business critical data is safe by backing up these databases, encrypting them, and only holding on to them for however long is actually necessary for business purposes.
And then rolling all that up with some aftercare at the end, we have SQL Monitor, which helps teams looking after SQL Server environments be a lot more proactive. We can use that to monitor the availability of servers and databases that contain our sensitive information, and then get tailor-made alerts direct to your inbox so you can respond to incidents or threats to that sensitive information with the urgency it needs. We can also automatically generate reports about the performance of the entire estate.
So of these steps, we're actually going to focus on two key areas today, and that is provisioning copies of databases to work on,
and then the ongoing monitoring as well.
So establishing production-like environments with realistic load and data sets for use in development and testing, or pre-production in general, has long been a challenge for organizations. Working with a copy of the production database enables developers to find errors faster and actually prevents problems when changes are deployed. It does, however, take a long time and huge amounts of disk space to provision copies. Most frequently, we see people taking backups of a production system and restoring them into pre-production. But obviously, these can get old. Nobody wants to be copying these across. Ain't nobody got time to be updating pre-production environments. So they're taking up the huge amount of disk space and time, but they become increasingly unreliable and are really difficult to keep track of, especially when multiple developers are involved. So the last situation we actually want to find ourselves in is with old data, everyone being forced to share copies of databases due to space requirements, throwing staplers across the room at colleagues who overwrite their stored procedure changes, and of course the elephant in the room, copying sensitive protected health information or personally identifiable information into non-production environments. Because let's face it, they're not going to have the same level of security as production does. But how exactly does it fit into DevOps? Well, Redgate's SQL provision supports a database DevOps approach whilst keeping compliance central to the process. With the virtual cloning technology in SQL Clone, databases can be created in seconds just using megabytes of storage, and this allows for isolated development and testing. Sensitive data can be anonymized or replaced with one of the components in this tooling, Data Masker, to ensure data is protected as it moves between environments. And with a single central management system for provisioning, the entire process is simple, repeatable, transparent, and auditable. So I guess that I should probably stop blabbing on and actually show you what we mean when we say database provisioning. So if we jump into our virtual machine here, what you'll notice if we come into SQL Server Management Studio is that we have a database here called forums-redgate-com. Now, as a case study, this is our development environment. This is being shared by a number of our developers. They're treading on each other's toes while trying to make changes. And of course, being a backup and restore is still taking all that space and time whenever I need to refresh it or any such processes. But the major, as I said, elephant in the room earlier, you'll notice that actually we've got a few famous faces in this particular database in the bodies of Grant Fritchie and Steve Jones. So what we want is a nice, simple process whereby we can enable our development and testing pre-production teams to get everything they need to keep dev and test realistic and working hard for them, but also to completely remove them from the scope of any of this legislation by pseudonymizing their details. Well, fortunately, what we're going to be seeing is SQL provision in action, and that's the combination of clone and data masker. So this particular tooling depends on two key principles. You have your images and you have your clones. And the image is a point in time representation of a database taken either from a live database or from a backup. And then what happens is we run the masking operation against it on its way to that image, and that's stored on a Windows file share. So it's protected inherently before the image is even created. Then what we do is spin up what we call differencing disks or clones on the hosts where this data is needed to be consumed. Because these reference the image, they're kept very, very small indeed, but let's see it in action. So you've seen me trying to work with a live SQL Server, and as we know, the forums-redgate-com environment is a copy of our production environment, so let's just consume that for now. And you'll see at the point of creating an image, I'm able to browse and select a masking set. Now, the masking sets are created in the data masker component itself through the user interface, and you build up these rules iteratively, focusing on the different columns across the different tables that need to be protected. In this particular set, all I've done is masked names, email addresses, and phone numbers. We can also choose to run it in a different order because we can import multiple scripts in here. Now, that means we can also run a SQL script against the image, which will allow us to, for example, remove production level permissions and instead put in place dev and test permissions. All we have to do is choose a location for the image to be hosted and give it a really creative name. How about forums image? Wow, bet you didn't see that one coming. So essentially what's going to happen here under the hood is that we're going to temporarily take a copy of the database. Then we're going to be running that masking process against it. And then we take the underlying files from that copy, mount them into a virtual hard disk. Then we drop the temporary copy, it's completely gone, no sensitive data persists whatsoever. And now you'll notice that we have a forums image. We have a modified flag set. Now, we can actually see that this has been modified. If we want further information about how it's been protected, we can query the config database behind clone, and it will tell us what ran against the copy, what ran against the image. We can actually create a clone from this now, so say to our Win 2016 development instance, and I can give the clone name, again, a really creative name like forums-redgate-com _dev _. Let's give me my own development environment. So in just a couple of seconds, what we will do is spin up this differencing disk, which to SSMS, to Microsoft, to Windows, looks like a full copy of the database. But actually, regardless whether the image is 102 megabytes, 102 gigabytes, or 10.2 terabytes, the clones themselves will still only be about 50 megabytes in size. As we were saying before, the whole process is auditable, so we can see exactly who's created these clones, when they've been created, where they've been put, so we get that peace of mind as well. If we refresh our databases now, we'll notice that actually, let's just open this window, you'll see we've got now our forums-redgate-com dev Chris environment. And if we open up our tables and look at, say, the contacts there, you'll notice that actually all of the names have been pseudonymized. In fact, all of the numbers, the addresses, the joining dates, and the emails have all been pseudonymized. And literally now that means we can take our pre-production environments completely out of the scope of legislation. So what did we just do there? Well, we've just put in place a data firewall. We've put it as such that only the necessary people who need access to the actual underlying personally identifiable or protected health information have access. For everyone else who just needs an idea of what production tastes and feels like to make sure their work is as productive as possible, they are getting a sanitized copy, but of course, because it's so quick and so simple, it's really easy to save on time, to save on space, and also to just protect information by design and by default.
Okay, so now moving on to monitoring. So server estates in general are growing, as well as the number of instances that are being personally managed. As this happens, the amount of time the team spends firefighting and fixing these issues also just naturally increases. Ultimately, we are always having to come back and answer those questions about performance and availability. You know, the why has my server gone down, or why can't I access my account, or why was the database so slow half an hour ago? The reality is that we don't want to be surprised by those questions. What we like to do is to anticipate those, or even just avoid those questions altogether. So the answer to this is simple. Monitoring won't fix all of your problems, but whatever challenges you do face, it will definitely make them simpler. So in a recent survey, looking at the state of SQL Server monitoring, what we found out was that 47% of respondents expected their SQL Server estate to grow in the next 12 months, whereas only 12% expected it to become smaller. I mean, personally, I kind of love to know where those shrinking servers are coming from. We also saw that most respondents spend half an hour a day looking at server health, and then a further hour on average resolving issues. And typically the team size for that tends to be small, consisting of 1 to 3 people. So SQL Monitor gives you the answer and makes it simple to show the problem to other people. So with SQL Monitor, you can have a quick look at the health of your entire estate and get notified through alerts around any errors that pop up. You can dive into a single instance, and that allows you to diagnose your issues faster and just prevent them from recurring. And then you can report upwards about the performance of the estate automatically, and you can go into as much detail as you're ever going to need. So whatever challenges you and your SQL servers face over the next year, consider including monitoring as part of your solution. It can only really make your life easier. Okay, so let's take a look. So what you should see in front of you now is the monitor dashboard. So one point of note is that this is again, it's a browser-based app, and I'm actually running this off a public-facing website. So that's monitor.red-gate.com. So if you guys ever want to have a play and see what it looks like, if you just navigate to monitor.red-gate.com, you'll be able to, have a go yourself. But yeah, this is the landing page, and this is what we imagine most individuals will see on a daily basis, or have up on the wall, or wherever it sits. Effectively, what you can see here is all the instances I have being monitored. I've grouped them up into several different locations. So we've got our production environment, we've got our development environment, testing environment, and we've even got some Azure databases as well. And so you can see from a snapshot that my production environment is looking pretty good. So these are both green. So we use a traffic light system, green to be healthy, yellow to be, while not critical, something definitely of note, and then red to be those instances that are under critical alerts. You know, in that case, the instance itself may be unreachable. And so, of course, with the definition of a data loss encompassing unreachable data, that is something that we'd want to focus on. And yeah, from here, I can quickly tell generally how my estate is doing. And I can focus on these production environments. If they're up, I'm happy. I can then filter down and focus on whatever I want to. So if I want to focus on that production environment, I can simply select that, or the development environment, or I could just look at those that are going wrong. What I can also do is switch to an alternate view, so we can see much more in one quick dashboard, and that allows us to support up to hundreds of instances if we so desire. Okay, so everything looks fairly good at the moment. We've got a dev and a few test environments that are down, but as I said, our production environments are looking okay. But if we did detect an issue, and if we did need to go in and fix that problem and maybe stop it from coming up again, all we have to do is open up one of those nodes, and what we see is a whole host of information based around the top metrics for this particular instance. So that is the CPU, the memory, the I/O, and the weights. And if I desire, I can just focus on one of these. So I can just bring this down to the CPU. I can look at performance over, so here I'm looking over the last 24 hours. But if I want, I can change the time frame. So I could go to 2 days, or I could go to 3 days. And I could even look at what was happening, say, tomorrow or yesterday or the day before, or even a month back if I so desire. So when someone asks, why did our production environment go down last night, then I can answer that question. What I can then do is baseline that. So I can see the performance of this particular instance, and I can verify that that is within expected parameters. So what we can see here is by bringing in the baseline, we look over the previous week, and we can see that, okay, so while a lot of these spikes have occurred, this big spike here falls outside that baseline. So that might be something I want to focus on. So I can bring in over this window. I can resize that as well to just focus on that particular time frame. And we can get a lot more information around what was happening during that location. So not only can I see those top metrics, but if I scroll down, I can also look at, well, for example, I can look at the top queries that were running during that time. I can reorder them and focus on, well, maybe I want to see what was executing the most. Maybe I want to see what had the most logical writes. I can also focus on a whole host of other useful information around my environment. So if I want to look at what's coming up in the error log, for example, or if I want to look at specific databases. So if I have this SQL Central database, I can open this up, have a look at some metrics around this. So here we can see the transactions information. We can see when the last backup was taken. We can see the files on the disk and when they're likely to run out of space. And again, something I can account for. So we can see 4 months' time, I'm going to have to worry about this. Taking that further, we also have alerting capability within SQL Monitor. So we can see what alerts are cropping up. We also group these up. So if you have alerts that fire off continuously, you're not going to have an inbox that's flooded with alerts. You can go in and see all the unique alerts that are coming. These different alerts can be set on a whole host of things. So we have a load of that come out of the box, but also if you want to create your own custom metric and custom alert, you can do that as well. You can then use that custom metric to perform an in-depth analysis, and you can then surface that through the reporting. So with the reporting, we tend to operate on a tile-based system. So if you need to provide assurance that we haven't got that much downtime, then you can automatically send out a report that includes that information along with whatever information you'd like to include. So these are highly customizable. You can mix around the tiles however you like. Okay, so if we go back to the presentation,
Brilliant. So German IT service provider, or in German, IT Dienstleister, I hope I said that right, Fiducia and GAD IT AG, provides the systems that power 36,000 ATMs and over 80 million bank accounts in Germany.
Yeah, and last year they implemented Redgate SQL Monitor to better manage the performance of their growing SQL Server estate, delivering better customer satisfaction and driving growth for the business. With a further 150 servers expected in 2018, Fiducia and GAD had two options: significantly increase the DBA headcount or invest in third-party tooling.
So since implementation, Fiducia and GAD has been able to scale operations at an unprecedented rate. They've introduced 150 new servers this year and 70 to 80 new applications so far. Managing this increase in servers would typically require additional support or jeopardize quality. However, Redgate's solution has enabled the DBA team to remain the same size, while also quickly alerting them to the performance issues and allowing the team to be more proactive.
What this means is that the team then have a lot more knowledge and the confidence they need to deliver a high standard of service to their customers.
Just like the impeccable standards Redgate customers have come to expect themselves.
Exactly.
So it's been a heck of a journey. We've been through quite a lot of information, obviously seen a few cool things. But does anyone have any questions? I see that we have had one. And that question so far is, with GDPR and other new regulations, can email addresses still be used to authenticate applications, access to databases, etc.? Or do you need to go to a less personal method of identifying users? So there's a couple of things in there, isn't there, Chris?
Yeah, so there's I guess a key thing is maybe whether you're using personal information as a primary key.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly, if you wanted to copy information into a pre-production environment that where the actual identifier was acting as a primary key, then there are absolutely methods of sort of synchronizing the pseudonymization of that primary key and all related foreign keys, and indeed methods of masking email addresses. Ultimately, it depends where this sits. Certainly with something like the GDPR, if it's legitimate business interest and everything relies on that, then obviously you have a case to make.
Yeah, so ultimately, you know, the bank that I have my mortgage with, they require my personal information. So I can't really go to them and say I want to be forgotten because they have a clear business case for that.
Exactly. So for actually identifying users, there's a certain amount of give and take, I guess, and quite a lot of grey area. If you did want to have a more in-depth discussion about that, please do feel free to get in touch with us. Maybe, you know, we can expand on those points, and obviously both Chris and I would be more than happy to tackle that moving forwards as well.
I think it would be pretty hard to argue that you've used your email address for authentication, but you don't want to be involved with that company. I don't know.
This is true.
Okay, so we've seen another one pop in. So Net 2000 being the company that Datamasker came from originally.
Indeed.
So they offered Datamasker for both SQL and Oracle. Is Redgate continuing to offer both?
Yes, absolutely. They are both solutions that we very heavily believe in. You know, it's a very real problem, both sides of those RDBMS platforms. So essentially, what we're doing is obviously offering the pseudonymization on the MS SQL Server side as part of this data privacy suite you've seen today, but we are still very much investing in Datamasker for Oracle as well. And we can even synchronize between the two, can't we?
Yeah, so that's fairly nice and fairly easily done. So building your rules in either Datamasker for SQL or Datamasker for Oracle, and then syncing them across to the other one.
It's very straightforward. Okay, we've got one more question as well. So can the masking and cloning tools be run via the command line?
Yeah, so you can run masker and you can run clone from command line. And that also means, of course, that you can run them through a PowerShell script. So this is something we see a lot of our clients do, time and time again.
Yeah.
Maybe set it on a schedule to refresh certain clones, like developer instances, delete them, pop them back up.
Absolutely, and indeed SQL Provision, the combination of clone and masker, actually comes with several built-in PowerShell commandlets that allow you to do that scheduling and automation, and it's just so simple that even a simpleton like me can do it.
Okay, so we've got an interesting one here, which is whether the suite allows real-time encryption of personally identifiable information, and can that then be decrypted when needed?
That is, that's a pretty interesting question. So I guess the answer to this is the suite does not offer real-time encryption of at-rest production data. Well, that was quite a mouthful. The suite offers the encryption of data coming out as a backup, and also offers the pseudonymization of data as it moves into these pre-production environments. And that ultimately means that if anyone was to, by nefarious means, get a hold of one of these copies of a pre-production environment, it wouldn't need to be encrypted, because ultimately the data they would have would be rubbish, would be not useful.
Yeah, and it's kind of a key thing that you don't really want to go back the other way once you've masked that data. So I think for most people, that's fine.
Absolutely. Okay, well, now it looks like all the questions we've actually had. So one final note before everybody goes. Please don't forget to register for this quarter's SQL in the City, Redgate's free virtual SQL Server training event. That's being streamed on Wednesday, the 20th of June, 2018. There's actually 2 times for it. It's going to be pretty much the same both times, but obviously it depends which fits better to your schedule. You don't want to be tuning in at 12 p.m. I keep forgetting what lunchtime is, 12 p.m. British summertime, if obviously it's going to be 11 p.m. where you are. So hopefully those times work well for you, and we'll be able to see you at SQL in the City streamed.
Yeah, and if you've got any more queries on what you've seen today, then please feel free to contact us. So you can always reach us at the email on the screen now, so that's dataprivacyprotect@red-gate.com. And if you are interested and you want to find out more about Redgate and what we do, then please head on over to redgate.com. That's red-gate.com. Although if you go to Redgate as all one word, that will also work.
That's true, it will. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Have a fantastic rest of the week and weekend, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you soon.
Yeah, I hope that's been helpful. Thanks, guys.